I will have your baby, she said. And the Apache rancher offered her his heart. The desert sky had a strange way of making a man feel small. Every evening, as the sun lowered itself behind the red hills of Arizona, the land around Daniel Redhawk's ranch glowed in deep shades of orange and gold. The air would cool just a little, and the wind would carry the scent of dry earth and wild grass. It was beautiful, peaceful, and wide beyond imagination. But for Daniel, the beauty often felt too quiet. Daniel was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with steady hands that had learned hard work long ago. He was an Apache rancher, born and raised on that land. His father had built the ranch from almost nothing, and Daniel had grown up riding horses before he could even properly read. The land was not just property to him, it was history. It carried memories of his ancestors and the lessons his father had taught him about strength, patience, and honor. Since his father had passed away 5 years earlier, Daniel had run the ranch alone. He managed the cattle, repaired fences, fixed water lines, and handled business with suppliers in town. He woke up before sunrise every day. He worked until the sky turned dark. His life was simple and steady. But when the work ended and the night grew quiet, the house felt empty. The ranch house was strong but modest. It had wooden floors that creaked softly and windows that faced the open fields. On the walls hung old photographs. His father standing proudly beside cattle, his mother smiling gently before she passed when Daniel was young. There was also one empty nail where a picture used to hang. He had taken that frame down years ago and never replaced it. Daniel rarely thought about his past out loud. A long time ago, he had been engaged to a woman from the city. She had loved him at first. She loved the idea of open skies and peaceful life. But when she realized how hard ranch life truly was, how isolated, how demanding, she slowly began to change. She wanted bright lights and busy streets. Daniel wanted the land. In the end, she chose the city. Daniel chose the ranch. Since then, he had built walls around his heart as strong as the fences around his cattle. That afternoon, dark clouds began gathering over the desert earlier than expected. Storms in Arizona could appear suddenly and leave just as quickly. Daniel noticed the wind shift while he was checking a fence near the south pasture. The air became heavy, and dust lifted from the ground. He knew he had to secure the equipment before the rain hit. Thunder rolled across the sky like distant drums. Daniel guided his horse back toward the barn. Large drops of rain began falling, slow at first, then heavier. Within minutes, the sky opened fully. Rain poured down in thick sheets, turning the dry earth into mud. Lightning flashed across the horizon. He had almost reached the main gate when he noticed something unusual. Through the curtain of rain, he saw a small car parked near the entrance of the ranch. It looked out of place against the rough landscape. One of its doors was slightly open. For a moment, Daniel felt cautious. Strangers rarely came out that far without reason. He tied his horse under shelter and walked toward the gate, rain soaking through his shirt. As he got closer, he saw a young woman standing beside the car. She was holding her arms around herself, trying to protect against the storm. Her hair was wet and stuck to her face. She looked exhausted. Daniel stopped a few steps away, careful but not unkind. "Are you all right?" he asked calmly, raising his voice over the rain. The woman looked up. Her eyes showed relief, mixed with fear. "My car broke down," she said. "I tried calling for help, but there's no signal out here." It looked old and tired, much like its driver. "You won't get reception around here," he replied. "The nearest town is about 20 miles back." She swallowed nervously. "I didn't realize that. I thought I could make it before the storm." Daniel looked at the darkening sky and then back at her. Whatever questions he had could wait. No one should stand alone in a storm like that. "There's shelter in the barn," he said. "Come inside before it gets worse." She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Inside the barn, the sound of rain hitting the roof was loud but comforting. The horses shifted calmly in their stalls. Daniel handed her a clean towel from a nearby shelf. "Thank you," she said softly, drying her face. "My name is Emily." Up close, he noticed she was younger than he first thought, maybe mid-20s. Her face looked tired, not just from the storm, but from something deeper. There was a quiet sadness in her expression. "You traveling through?" he asked. She nodded. "I was heading north to see someone. But I guess I didn't plan very well." Daniel studied her for a moment. Something about the way she placed her hand gently over her stomach caught his attention. He did not stare, but he noticed. "Your car won't move in this weather," he said. "You can wait out the storm here. When it clears, I'll take a look at the engine. I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not," Daniel said simply. The storm lasted longer than expected. Evening came quickly, and the sky turned dark. The car would have to wait until morning. Daniel faced a quiet decision. He could send her to town once the rain stopped, but it was late and the roads were muddy. The safer choice was obvious. "There's a spare room in the house," he said. "You can stay the night." Emily's eyes filled with gratitude. "I promise I won't be a problem." Daniel gave a small nod. "Just get dry." Inside the ranch house, the warmth felt different with another person present. Emily stepped carefully across the wooden floor, looking around as if she had entered another world. The house smelled of coffee and clean air. Daniel prepared a simple meal, beans, rice, and warm bread. Emily insisted on helping, though he noticed she moved carefully, as if protecting herself. When they sat at the table, silence filled the space at first. The only sound was the wind outside. After a few bites, Emily spoke quietly. "I'm sorry to just appear like this." "It happens," Daniel replied. She gave a small smile, but it faded quickly. "Not like this." He waited. Something told him she wanted to say more. She took a breath and finally spoke. "I'm pregnant." Daniel did not react strongly. He simply nodded once, showing he understood. "A father," she paused, her voice tightening. "He didn't want the responsibility. When he found out, he left." Daniel felt a quiet anger rise inside him, not at her, but at the situation. Still, he kept his voice calm. "Do you have family?" "Not nearby. I was trying to reach a distant relative, but I ran out of money before I could get there." Rain continued tapping against the windows. For the first time in years, Daniel felt his carefully built walls shift slightly. This young woman was not asking for pity. She was asking for a chance. "You can rest here tonight," he said firmly. "Tomorrow we'll see about your car." Emily looked down at her hands. "Thank you. You don't know how much that means." Later that night, Daniel lay awake in his room. He could hear faint footsteps as Emily moved in the hallway. The house no longer felt empty. It felt uncertain. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about responsibility, about honor, about the lessons his father had taught him. A man's strength was not measured only by how hard he worked, but by how he treated those who needed help. Outside, the storm slowly began to calm. The desert air felt fresh after rain. A new silence settled over the land. Neither Daniel nor Emily knew it yet, but that storm had not only brought rain to the ranch. The next morning, the desert looked completely different. The storm had washed the dust from the air, and everything felt fresh and bright. The sky was a clear blue, stretching wide above the ranch. Sunlight reflected off small puddles on the ground, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Daniel had been awake since before sunrise, as always. He had already fed the horses and checked the fences damaged by the wind, but his mind was not fully on his work. He kept thinking about the young woman sleeping in the spare room of his house. Emily woke up slowly, unsure at first where she was. For a moment she forgot about the storm and her broken car. Then she heard the distant sound of cattle and realized she was still at the ranch. She sat up carefully and placed her hand over her stomach, feeling both fear and hope at the same time. When she stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was standing near the stove, pouring coffee into a mug. The sunlight coming through the window made the room feel warm and calm. "Morning," he said quietly. "Good morning," she replied, her voice softer than usual. There was something less tense between them now. The storm had forced them into a kind of understanding. They were no longer strangers hiding behind polite words. Daniel handed her a glass of water instead of coffee. "You should drink this," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "Thank you." After breakfast, Daniel walked out to examine her car. Emily followed him slowly. The car hood was lifted, and Daniel studied the engine carefully. He wasn't a professional mechanic, but years of ranch life had taught him how to fix almost anything. After a long look, he wiped his hands on a cloth and shook his head slightly. "It's not something I can repair here," he said. "It needs parts. And that means town." Emily's shoulders dropped. "I don't have much money left," she admitted. Daniel leaned against the car door, thinking. He was not a man who made quick decisions when it came to responsibility. But he also believed that once you step forward to help someone, you did not stop halfway. "You can stay here until we figure it out," he said calmly. Emily looked surprised. "You barely know me." "That's true," he answered. "But I know enough." There was no pity there. No judgment. Just steady honesty. The day passed quietly. Emily insisted on helping around the house. She washed dishes and swept the floor. Daniel noticed that even though she moved slowly, she did not complain. She did not act helpless. Instead, she seemed determined to show she was not a burden. In the afternoon, Daniel asked if she wanted to ride with him to check the northern pasture. She hesitated at first, but then agreed. He helped her climb carefully onto the horse behind him. It had been years since anyone else had ridden with him like that. As they moved across the open land, Emily looked around in wonder. "It's so wide," she said. "It feels like the world never ends. That's why I stayed." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Most people would leave a place this quiet." "Most people do," he replied. They stopped near a small hill overlooking the fields. The wind was gentle now, carrying the smell of fresh grass. For a few minutes they sat without speaking. Then Emily surprised him. "I wasn't just traveling," she said softly. "I was running. When I told him about the baby, he said he wasn't ready. He said it would ruin his plans. I waited thinking he would change his mind, but instead he packed his things and left." She paused, her eyes focused on the horizon. "I felt foolish. I trusted someone who didn't stay." Daniel felt those words deeply. He understood what it meant when someone chose to leave. "You're not foolish," he said quietly. "Trusting someone isn't weakness." Emily looked at him with gratitude. "I don't want my child to grow up without stability," she continued. "I don't want them to feel unwanted." The wind moved gently through her hair. Daniel could see how serious she was. This wasn't about comfort or luxury. It was about giving her child a chance at a strong life. Over the next few days, a routine began to form. Emily stayed in the spare room. Daniel continued his ranch work. In the evenings, they shared simple meals and small conversations. Slowly, the silence between them became easier. But outside the ranch, people were beginning to notice. When Daniel drove into town to pick up supplies, a few familiar faces watched him closely. Small towns had a way of spreading stories quickly. Someone had seen a strange car at his gate during the storm. Someone else had noticed him buying extra groceries. At the general store, an older man named Carl raised an eyebrow. "Got company at the ranch?" he asked, with a half-smile. Daniel kept his voice steady. "Just helping someone out." Carl nodded, but his expression suggested he was curious. By the time Daniel returned home, he knew that whispers had already begun. That evening, Emily sensed something different in his mood. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He hesitated, then decided honesty was better. "People in town noticed you?" he said. "They like to talk." Her face fell slightly. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." "Let them talk." But later that night, Daniel lay awake again, thinking carefully. He knew what gossip could do. He knew how quickly assumptions could grow. He also knew that allowing fear of talk to control him would go against everything his father had taught him. The next afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily stood near the fence, watching Daniel repair a loose board. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in deep orange shades. She looked nervous but determined. "Daniel," she called softly. He turned toward her. She walked closer, holding her hands together tightly. For a moment, she struggled to find the right words. "I've been thinking," she began. "I don't want to keep running from place to place. I'm tired of feeling like I don't belong anywhere." Daniel waited quietly. Then she said the words that would change everything. "I will have your baby if you let me stay." Daniel stared at her surprised. He understood what she meant. She wasn't saying the child was his. She wasn't asking him to pretend. She was offering him something deeper, a chance to build a family in exchange for safety and stability. Her eyes were filled with fear and hope at the same time. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want," she continued quickly. I see how you live. You're steady. You don't run from responsibility. My child deserves someone like that." Daniel felt his heart beat heavier in his chest. This was not a small request. This was not about kindness for a few days. This was about a lifetime. "You don't even know if I'd be a good father," he said quietly. She gave a small, sad smile. "I've seen how you treat your animals, how you fix things instead of giving up. That tells me enough." He turned away for a moment, looking out at the land. The ranch had always been his world. He had accepted loneliness as part of it, but now, suddenly, he was being offered something he had quietly given up on, a family. "I won't accept a deal made out of fear," he said slowly. "It's not fear," she replied. "It's choice. I'm choosing to trust you." The wind moved between them again, carrying the warmth of the setting sun. Daniel faced her fully. "If you stay," he said carefully, "it won't be because you owe me. And it won't be because you're desperate. It will be because we both decide to try." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded firmly. "I understand." That night, neither of them slept easily. The future had shifted. The ranch no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It felt like the beginning of something uncertain and powerful. Daniel understood that saying yes would change his life forever. But for the first time in years, the idea of change did not feel like loss. Life at the ranch began to change in small but meaningful ways after that evening. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. There were no sudden promises or big celebrations. Instead, there was a quiet understanding between Daniel and Emily. They had both agreed to try, and trying meant showing up every single day with patience. The first few mornings felt different. Emily no longer acted like a guest. She woke up early, even when Daniel told her she could rest. She would sit at the kitchen table with a glass of water while he made breakfast. Sometimes she watched him in silence, noticing how carefully he measured everything, how he moved with calm confidence. There was something steady about him that made the house feel grounded. Daniel, on the other hand, found himself adjusting without realizing it. He began cooking slightly larger meals. He kept track of what foods Emily seemed to like. When he drove into town for supplies, he picked up fruit and other small things that might be good for her health. He did not speak much about it, but his actions were clear. Still, living under the same roof was not simple. They came from different worlds. Emily had grown up in a busy city filled with noise, traffic, and bright lights. She was used to neighbors living close by and stores open late at night. The ranch, in comparison, was silent and wide. Some evenings, when the wind howled across the fields, the emptiness felt overwhelming to her. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn dark, Emily spoke honestly. "Does it ever feel too quiet?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I learned to hear things in the quiet. The wind, the animals, my own thoughts." She smiled faintly. "In the city, there's always noise. You don't have to think too much." "And is that better?" She considered the question carefully. "It's easier, but maybe not better." Moments like that helped them understand each other. They did not rush conversations. They allowed silence to exist without fear. As the days passed, Emily wanted to contribute more. Even though Daniel insisted she should rest, she asked him to teach her small tasks. He showed her how to collect eggs from the chickens and how to check the water troughs. At first she was nervous around the horses, but Daniel patiently explained how animals respond to calm energy. "Don't show fear," he told her gently. "They can feel it." "I am a little afraid," she admitted. "That's all right," he said. "Just breathe steady." The first time she successfully brushed one of the horses without stepping back, her face lit up with pride. Daniel noticed that smile and felt something warm in his chest. It had been a long time since he had shared his world with someone. Her pregnancy slowly began to show more clearly. The doctor in town confirmed that everything was healthy, but regular checkups were important. Without hesitation, Daniel drove her to each appointment. He sat quietly in the waiting room at first, unsure of his place, but one afternoon the nurse invited him inside during the examination. Emily looked at him, uncertain. "You don't have to," she whispered. He nodded once. "I want to." When the doctor turned on the small machine that allowed them to hear the baby's heartbeat, the room filled with a soft, steady rhythm. It was quick and strong. Emily's eyes filled with tears immediately. Daniel stood still, listening carefully. That sound changed something inside him. It was no longer an idea. It was real. On the drive back to the ranch, neither of them spoke for several miles. The desert stretched wide around them, golden under the sun. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "That's a strong heartbeat," he said. Emily smiled through her tears. "Yes, it is." From that day forward, Daniel's connection grew deeper. He began thinking about the future in ways he had not allowed himself to before. He repaired the old wooden crib stored in the barn attic, sanding it down carefully and making sure it was safe. He did not announce what he was doing. He simply worked on it quietly in the evenings. Emily noticed one day when she walked into the barn unexpectedly, she saw the crib pieces laid out neatly, the fresh wood shining under the light. "You're fixing it," she said softly. He looked slightly embarrassed. "It was my father's work. Thought it shouldn't go to waste." Her heart felt full in that moment. "Thank you," she whispered. But even as trust grew, doubts sometimes appeared. One evening, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Daniel sensed something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I keep thinking, what if one day you regret this?" He leaned against the counter, considering her words. "Regret what?" "Taking on responsibility that isn't yours." Daniel walked closer and sat across from her. "Responsibility becomes yours when you choose it," he said calmly. "I'm not being forced." "But you didn't plan for this life," she insisted. "Neither did you," he replied. She looked down at her hands. "I'm scared." He reached forward slowly, placing his hand over hers. The gesture was simple but meaningful. "So am I," he admitted. That honesty surprised her. She had always seen him as unshakable. "You are?" she asked. He nodded. Being strong doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you stay anyway. Those words settled deeply into her heart. The local community continued to watch from a distance. Some neighbors were kind when they saw Emily in town. Others were curious but polite. Daniel never allowed gossip to enter his home. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and that made people think twice before speaking carelessly. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Mrs. Alvarez stopped by the ranch with a basket of homemade bread. She had known Daniel since he was a boy. "I heard you have company," she said warmly. Emily stepped forward politely. "Yes, ma'am." Alvarez studied her kindly. "Ranch life is hard," she said, "but it builds strong families." Emily felt encouraged by those words. It was the first time someone from the town had openly shown support. As weeks turned into months, their routine became natural. Daniel would return from long hours of work to find Emily waiting on the porch, reading or simply watching the sunset. Sometimes they talked about small things, weather, animals, plans for repairs. Other times they spoke about deeper matters. Emily shared stories from her childhood. She talked about her mother teaching her to cook and her dream of becoming a teacher one day. Daniel spoke about his father's lessons, about Apache traditions of respect and community. One evening, he showed her a small carved necklace that had belonged to his father. He said a man's honor is shown by how he protects his home, Daniel explained. Emily listened carefully. "You protect more than land," she said quietly. He met her eyes but said nothing. Yet in that silence, something powerful passed between them. Their relationship was no longer built on an arrangement. It was built on shared days, shared fears, and shared effort. Late one night, as wind moved gently outside, Emily woke from a troubling dream. She walked into the living room and found Daniel sitting there, unable to sleep as well. "I keep thinking you'll change your mind," she admitted again. He stood up and faced her fully. "Look at me," he said softly. She did. "I'm here," he continued, "and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, she believed it completely. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under the stars. Inside the ranch house, two lives were slowly weaving together, not through grand promises, but through steady presence. And in the quiet rhythm of ranch life, trust continued to grow. The weeks passed quietly, and the desert began to change colors again. The heat softened, and cool mornings arrived more often. Emily's due date was getting closer. The ranch house, once silent and still, now carried a feeling of waiting. Every small sound felt important. Every day felt like it was leading to something big. Daniel had finished repairing the crib and placed it carefully in the spare room, which was no longer just a spare room. Fresh blankets were folded neatly. A small wooden chair stood in the corner. Emily had sewn simple curtains by hand, choosing soft colors that reminded her of the sky at sunrise. They did not speak much about fear anymore, but it was there, quietly sitting beside them. One afternoon, Daniel returned from town later than usual. His face looked thoughtful, more serious than normal. Emily noticed immediately. "Is everything all right?" she asked from the porch, where she had been sitting with a glass of water. Daniel tied the horse and walked toward her slowly. "Someone came into the store today asking about you," he said carefully. Her body stiffened. "Asking about me?" He nodded once. "A man. Said he was looking for someone named Emily Carter." The world seemed to stop around her. The air felt heavier. "What did he look like?" she asked quietly, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "Mid-30s, dark jacket. City shoes, not ranch boots," Daniel replied. He looked unsure. Emily lowered her gaze to the ground. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "It's him," she whispered. Daniel did not need more explanation. He understood. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence. Emily stayed inside, sitting at the kitchen table, her thoughts racing. She had imagined this moment before, but she had hoped it would never actually come. She had worked so hard to build something steady at the ranch. Now the past was walking toward her door. By early evening, a car pulled up near the ranch gate. Daniel saw the dust rise first. He stepped outside calmly, though his heart beat stronger. Emily stood behind the window, watching with trembling hands. The man stepped out of the car slowly. He looked different from before, thinner, more tired. But it was him. He removed his sunglasses and approached carefully. "Daniel?" he asked. "That's right," Daniel replied evenly. "I'm Mark," the man said. I'm Emily's child's father." Daniel studied him for a long moment. Mark's voice carried uncertainty, not confidence. "What do you want?" Daniel asked calmly. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I heard she might be here. I've been trying to find her. Every memory came rushing back. The arguments, the disappointment, the loneliness. But this time, she was not alone. Daniel did not invite Mark inside immediately. She can decide if she wants to speak with you, he said firmly. After a few moments, Emily stepped out onto the porch. Her steps were slow, but steady. Mark looked at her, surprise and relief mixing on his face. Emily, he said softly. She did not smile. Why are you here? He rubbed the back of his neck nervously. I made a mistake, he began. I wasn't ready. I panicked. But I've been thinking, I want to do the right thing. The words sounded familiar. Too familiar. And what is the right thing? She asked quietly. I can provide, he said quickly. I have a stable job now. We can go back to the city. The baby should have both parents. Daniel stood slightly to the side, not interrupting. This was her moment. Emily felt torn for a brief second. The city meant hospitals, nearby, schools, money, convenience. It meant not worrying about every dollar spent. It meant an easier path on the surface. But she also remembered the night he had left. The silence. The empty apartment. The feeling of being unwanted. You left when I needed you, she said steadily. I was scared, Mark replied. So was I, she answered. The desert wind moved between them, lifting dust from the ground. I'm here now, he insisted. She looked at Daniel for just a moment. He did not speak. He did not try to influence her. His expression remained calm, but his eyes showed quiet support. Mark noticed the glance. Is this why you're staying? He asked, a hint of tension in his voice. Because of him? Emily straightened her shoulders. I'm staying because someone chose to stand beside me when I had nothing. So that's it? You're just replacing me? No, she replied firmly. I'm choosing stability. Silence fell again. Mark tried once more. Think about the future. Think about what's easier. Emily placed both hands gently over her stomach. Easy isn't always strong, she said. Daniel felt a quiet respect grow inside him. She was no longer the frightened woman from the storm. She was steady now. Mark's shoulders dropped slightly. He seemed to realize he had lost something long before this conversation. I can still send money, he said quietly. I don't want to disappear completely. If you want to help responsibly, that's your choice. But I'm not leaving. Mark looked at Daniel one last time. There was no anger in Daniel's eyes, only firmness. After a few moments, Mark turned and walked back to his car. The engine started and dust rose behind him as he drove away. The ranch became quiet again. Emily stood still, breathing slowly. The weight of the moment settled around her. Daniel stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. Are you all right? He asked softly. She nodded, though tears filled her eyes. I needed to say that, she whispered. He gave a small nod. You were strong. I was tempted for a second. Not because of him, but because of fear. Fear makes things look simple, Daniel replied. But it doesn't build anything lasting. She looked up at him. You didn't try to stop me. You had to choose. That answer meant more to her than anything else. They walked back toward the house together. The sun was setting again, turning the sky into soft shades of red and gold. The ranch felt peaceful, almost protective. That night Emily slept more calmly than she had in weeks. The past had knocked on her door, and she had answered it without running. Daniel sat on the porch alone for a while, thinking deeply. He understood now that love was not about control or loud promises. It was about standing firm when things were uncertain. It was about giving someone the space to decide freely. When he finally stepped inside, he noticed the small crib waiting in the corner room. It no longer represented a possibility. It represented a commitment, and for the first time both of them knew that what they were building was not an arrangement born from desperation. It was a future chosen with open eyes. The days after Mark's visit felt calmer, as if a heavy cloud had finally moved away from the ranch. Emily seemed lighter. She walked with more confidence, spoke with more certainty, and smiled more often. The fear that had quietly followed her for months was no longer controlling her thoughts. She had faced her past and chosen her future. Her due date was now very close. Daniel had prepared everything as best as he could, kept the truck filled with fuel in case they needed to leave quickly. He placed a small bag near the front door with essentials for the hospital. Even though he did not talk about his worry, it showed in the way he double-checked every small detail. One cool early morning, before the sun had fully risen, Emily felt a sharp wave of discomfort that was different from anything before. She sat up slowly in bed, breathing carefully. Another wave followed, stronger this time. She knew. Daniel, she called softly at first. He was awake within seconds. Years of ranch life had trained him to respond quickly to any sound at night. He stepped into the hallway and saw her holding onto the doorframe. "It's time?" he asked calmly, though his heart began to race. She nodded. Within minutes they were in the truck, driving toward the small hospital in town. The sky was turning pale blue as the sun began to rise over the desert hills. The road felt longer than usual. Emily held onto the seat tightly, breathing the way the nurse had taught her during previous visits. Daniel kept his eyes focused ahead but spoke gently. "You're doing fine. Just breathe steady." She looked at him between breaths. "You're not nervous at all, are you?" He gave a small smile. "I am. I'm just hiding it." That made her laugh softly, even through the discomfort. When they arrived at the hospital, the staff moved quickly. Emily was taken into a room and Daniel stayed beside her without hesitation. He held her hand, spoke calmly when she needed reassurance, and stayed silent when she needed focus. Hours passed slowly. Outside the window, the bright desert sun climbed high into the sky. Inside the room, time felt different, stretched and intense. Finally, as the afternoon light filled the room, a strong cry broke through the air. A baby boy. The sound was clear and powerful. Emily's eyes filled with tears of relief and joy. Daniel stood still for a moment, almost unable to move. When the nurse gently placed the baby in his arms, he felt something deeper than words. The child was small, wrapped in a soft blanket, with tiny fingers curled tightly. The baby's eyes were closed, his breathing steady. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt completely certain about something. He belonged to this moment. Emily watched him from the hospital bed, her heart full. "He looks peaceful," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "He's strong." They decided to name him Samuel, after Daniel's father. It was a way to connect the past with the future, to honor the man who had taught Daniel about responsibility and quiet strength. When they returned to the ranch a few days later, everything felt different. The house that once echoed with silence now carried the soft sounds of a newborn. The crib that Daniel had repaired with his own hands was finally in use. The first nights were difficult. Samuel cried often, needing comfort and care. Sleep became rare. Emily sometimes felt overwhelmed, especially during the long hours before sunrise. But every time she felt exhausted, Daniel was there. He would gently take the baby in his arms and walk slowly across the wooden floor, humming old songs his father used to sing. He changed diapers, warmed bottles, and learned quickly how to soothe the child. "You don't have to do all this," Emily said one night, watching him rock Samuel gently. "Yes, I do," he replied softly. "I chose this." Those simple words meant everything. As weeks turned into months, the ranch adjusted to its newest member. Daniel often carried Samuel in one arm while checking fences or feeding animals. The baby seemed calm outdoors, as if the open sky comforted him. Neighbors who had once whispered now smiled warmly when they saw Daniel in town holding the child proudly. Alvarez visited often, bringing homemade food and offering helpful advice. Slowly, respect replaced curiosity. Emily grew stronger with each passing day. She no longer felt like someone seeking shelter. She felt like part of the land itself. She planted small flowers near the porch and began planning ways to start teaching online classes from home in the future. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with golden light, Daniel found Emily sitting on the porch, with Samuel resting peacefully in her arms. "He loves the sunset," she said softly. Daniel sat beside her. "So do I." The wind moved gently across the fields, carrying the scent of grass and earth. After a long pause, Daniel spoke. "When you first arrived here during that storm, I thought it was just a passing moment," he said honestly. "I didn't know it would change everything. Neither did I." He took a slow breath. "I don't want this to be something temporary. I don't want you to feel like you're just staying. I want you here because I love you," he continued, his voice steady but sincere. "Not because of an agreement. Not because of the baby, but because my life feels right with you in it." Emily felt tears fill her eyes again, but this time they were not from fear or uncertainty. "Daniel," she whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring. It was not expensive or flashy, but it was chosen carefully. "Will you marry me?" he asked quietly. For a moment she could not speak. She looked at Samuel, then back at Daniel. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I will." The desert sky seemed even wider in that moment, as if it were blessing their decision. Their wedding was small and simple, held right there on the ranch. A few neighbors attended. Mrs. Alvarez cried happily. The ceremony took place under the open sky, with the mountains standing silently in the distance. Daniel wore his best ranch jacket. Emily wore a simple white dress. Samuel rested peacefully in Mrs. Alvarez's arms during the vows. When Daniel promised to stand beside Emily for the rest of his life, his voice did not shake. It carried the same steady strength he had shown from the beginning. Years later, people in town would still talk about the storm that brought a stranger to the ranch gate, but they would no longer speak about it with curiosity. They would speak about it with respect. Because what began as a desperate moment had grown into something solid and lasting. The ranch was no longer just land passed down from father to son. It was now filled with laughter, small footsteps, and shared dreams. And every evening, as the sun set over the wide Arizona sky, Daniel would stand on the porch with his family beside him, knowing that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive when you least expect them, like rain in the desert. A storm had once brought uncertainty to his gate, but it had also brought love.